Attention! A real story verified by a team specializing in the paranormal, with testimonies, images, and received documents. Proceeding may shock or disturb you and affect your emotional and mental state. Watch at your own risk.
My name is Rebecca Hartwell, and for 12 years I worked as a kindergarten teacher at a private school on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. I always loved my job, watching children develop, their daily discoveries, the way they see the world with genuine curiosity. It was rewarding and simple, until it wasn't anymore. This story began on an October afternoon during the 2019 school year. I had a class of 23 children between 5 and 6 years old. Normal children with their unique personalities, their challenges, and joys. But there was one student who worried me more than the others. Her name was Emma. A small girl for her age, too thin, with dark, always messy hair, and clothes that seemed too big for her fragile body. She had arrived at school in early September, mid-semester, which was already unusual. From the first day, I noticed something different about her. It wasn't anything supernatural, nothing inexplicable. It was just sad. She seemed to carry a weight that no 6-year-old should carry. Her eyes had a disturbing depth, as if they had seen things I preferred not to imagine. Emma rarely smiled. While the other children ran around the playground during recess, she sat alone under the furthest tree, watching everything with an empty expression. When I tried to include her in games, she would just shake her head negatively and stay where she was. But what really caught my attention were the physical signs. Small bruises on her arms, scratches on her legs, a poorly healed cut above her eyebrow. When I asked how she got hurt, she always gave vague answers. I fell. I played at the park. I don't remember. I had worked with children long enough to recognize the signs, but I also knew that an unfounded accusation could destroy an innocent family. I needed to be sure before making any formal report. So I started observing more closely, discreetly documenting every mark, every strange behavior. What I didn't know that October afternoon, as I looked out the classroom window and saw Emma sitting alone on the motionless swing in the playground, was that my investigation would lead me to discover something very difficult to deal with. My routine was always the same. I arrived at school at 7 in the morning, half an hour before the students. I prepared the classroom, organized the day's materials, reviewed the lesson plan. The school was old but well maintained, with that characteristic smell of polished wood and children's books. Children started arriving around 7:30. Rushed parents dropped their children at the gate. Some mothers came in to quickly chat about everyday matters. It was a quiet community, middle-class families who valued education. Emma was always there when I arrived in the classroom. I never saw her entering, never witnessed her arrival. She simply appeared, already sitting at her desk in the corner, with that faded backpack at her feet. I found it strange at first, but I imagined she might arrive very early with some school transport service I wasn't aware of. During the first few weeks, I tried to establish a connection with Emma. I praised her drawings, even if they were just dark, confused scribbles. I sat next to her at snack time, noticing that she ate slowly, as if each bite hurt. Sometimes she left half her food untouched, simply staring at the plate with that distant expression. Emma was always alone, completely isolated. While the other children played in groups, ran around the playground, laughed and shouted, she remained motionless in her corner, watching everything with those empty eyes. I attributed this to the trauma she clearly carried, to the violence I imagined she was suffering at home. It was in the 3rd week that I noticed the first serious bruise. A deep purple on her left forearm, circular in shape, like finger marks squeezing hard. I discreetly called Emma during recess and asked what had happened. She looked at the mark, then at me, and said in such a low voice that I had to lean in to hear. I disobeyed. When I asked for more details, she simply shook her head and walked away, returning to her isolated corner of the playground. That night, I went home with a heavy heart. I thought about reporting it to Child Protective Services, but I hesitated. Years ago, a colleague had reported a family for suspected abuse, and it was wrong. The family sued the school, the teacher lost her job. I needed to be sure. I needed concrete evidence before ruining the lives of potentially innocent people. So I devised a plan. I would start using specific playful activities, games that would allow children to express their feelings and their home lives without direct pressure. Free drawings, invented stories, role-playing games. Perhaps Emma would reveal something through these activities that she couldn't say in words. The following week, I implemented the first activity. I asked each child to draw their family and their home. It was a simple task, which always generated colorful and cheerful drawings of smiling parents, dogs, sunny gardens. But Emma's drawing was different. Disturbingly different. Emma's drawing was just black. Absolute black. She had used the black crayon to completely cover the paper, pressing so hard that in some places the paper had torn. There were no human figures, no house, nothing recognizable. Just that dense, oppressive darkness. I picked up the drawing and crouched beside Emma. I gently asked her what she had drawn. She looked at me with those deep eyes and replied, "My house. It's always dark there." I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I remained calm. I asked if she could draw the people who lived with her. Emma took another paper and this time drew 3 figures, 2 large ones and 1 small one in the middle. But something was wrong. The large figures had no faces, just smudges where eyes and mouth should have been. The small figure in the middle had its mouth open, as if screaming, but no sound came out. There were red stains around the small figure. When I asked who the people were, Emma pointed to the large figures and said, "Mommy and him." Then she pointed to the small figure. "That's me." I tried to ask more, but she put the crayons back in the box and remained silent for the rest of the afternoon. I kept the drawings in my drawer. They were evidence, proof that something was very wrong in that house, but they still weren't enough for a formal report. I needed more. It was 2 days later that the first truly disturbing incident happened. It was recess time and the children were playing on the playground. I was supervising, as always, when I heard a sharp scream. One of the students, Sophie, had fallen off the slide and was on the ground crying with a bleeding knee. I ran to her, and as I helped her up, I noticed Emma standing right at the foot of the slide. She was in the perfect position, as if she had just done something. Her arms were still stretched forward, and that neutral expression on her face made me uncomfortable. I took Sophie to the infirmary, and while cleaning her wound, I asked what had happened. Between sobs, Sophie said someone had pushed her. "Who was it?" I asked. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I don't know. I didn't see. It happened so fast." After Sophie calmed down, I went back to the playground. Emma was still there in the same spot, motionless as a statue. I gathered some children who were near the slide and asked if they had seen what happened to Sophie. They all shook their heads. Nobody saw anything. I insisted. Someone must have seen. The playground was full of children. But they all repeated the same thing. They were playing, they heard the scream, they saw Sophie on the ground. Nobody saw anyone push her. Tommy even suggested she might have slipped on her own. But I had seen Emma there, in that incriminating position. The problem was that I had no proof. I had no witnesses. It was my word against the children's silence, and Emma, when questioned, just looked at me with those empty eyes and said, "I didn't do anything." I started documenting everything. Every new bruise that appeared on Emma's body, every strange behavior, every suspicious incident. I filled an entire notebook with detailed observations. I took discrete photos of the marks whenever possible. I was building a case, gathering evidence for when I finally decided to make the report. But the more I observed, the more frustrated I became. Emma was elusive, impossible to catch in the act. And the other children never ever saw anything that could incriminate her or confirm my suspicions about what was happening at her home. That night, sitting at home reviewing my notes, I made a decision. I needed to act more directly. I needed to find out where Emma lived and, if necessary, confront the family personally. In the following days, more incidents happened. Small accidents that always seemed to have Emma nearby, but without concrete proof. A boy tripped on the stairs and swore someone grabbed his ankle. A girl had her art supplies destroyed during recess. Another student was locked in the bathroom from the inside, and when we finally managed to open the door, he was in a panic, saying someone had turned the lock from the outside. I always saw Emma nearby, always with that same empty expression, observing the consequences of each incident as if studying a scientific experiment. But when I asked, when I investigated, there were never any witnesses. There was never any proof. I started arriving at school earlier, determined to see who brought Emma. I wanted to talk to her guardians, to understand what was happening at home. But the school entrance was always chaos. Dozens of parents and children arrived at the same time, between 7 and 7:30. Cars stopped quickly, children ran out. The confusion was total. Amidst that crowd, that constant commotion, I could never identify who was with Emma. She always appeared in the hallway or already inside the classroom, and by the time I tried to reach the entrance to see who had brought her, it was already too late. All the adults had already left, swallowed by the morning rush of hurried parents. I tried to stand at the entrance gate several mornings, but it was impossible. I had responsibilities. I needed to prepare the classroom, attend to other parents who wanted to talk. Emma always managed to go unnoticed in the confusion. It was frustrating, but I understood. Some families were like that, discreet, hurried, without time for social interactions. The bruises on Emma continued to appear. Every week, a new mark. A cut above her eyebrow, deep scratches on her arms, a nasty purple mark on her neck that looked like handprints. When I asked, the answers were always vague, always evasive. I fell. I played a lot. I hit the door. I started discreetly photographing every new injury, documenting dates, locations, appearance. My notebook was getting thick with notes. I knew I was building a solid case. I just needed a little more time, a little more evidence, before making the official report. But something else began to bother me. Emma's drawings that I kept in the drawer seemed different every time I looked at them. The dark black seemed denser, more oppressive. The red stains seemed to have spread. I knew it was impossible, that they were just the same drawings, but every time I picked them up, I felt something had changed. I started having nightmares. I dreamed of Emma standing at the end of a dark corridor, calling me with that low, hoarse voice. I woke up in the middle of the night with my heart pounding, my clothes drenched in sweat. The obsession was consuming me, but I couldn't stop. That girl needed me, and I wasn't going to abandon her. During a class, I asked the children to draw their families again. I wanted to see if Emma would reveal something new, some detail I could use. But her drawing was even more disturbing. This time she drew a house, a small house with dark windows. And next to the house, on the ground, a red figure lying down. Just that. "What is that?" I asked, pointing to the red figure. Emma looked at the drawing for a long moment before replying, "It's me," after it was over. My blood ran cold. "After what was over, Emma?" She didn't answer. She just put the crayons away and stared out the window for the rest of the afternoon. That night, I couldn't sleep. Emma's words echoed in my mind. After it was over. What was over? The abuse? Her childhood? Something worse? I made a decision. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to act. I went to the school secretary's office and discreetly wrote down the address listed on Emma's enrollment form. I shouldn't have done that. It was against privacy policies, but I was desperate. I needed to know the truth. The address was in a rundown area of Portland, near the old paper mill, a neighborhood known for social problems, poverty, crime. It made sense. Vulnerable families were often where abuse happened most frequently, hidden behind closed doors and neighbors who preferred not to get involved. I spent days planning, mentally rehearsing what I would say when I got there, how I would approach Emma's mother, how I would ask the right questions without sounding accusatory, but making it clear that I knew something was wrong. The tension was killing me. Every day in the classroom seemed longer, heavier. Emma watched me constantly, as if she knew exactly what I was planning. Her eyes followed me, studied me, silently judged me. The other incidents continued. A child hurt his finger in a door that closed by itself. Another found his snack completely destroyed inside his backpack. Small things, but they were creating a climate of tension in the classroom. The children were scared, parents were starting to complain, and Emma was always there, always watching, always present at the exact moment something happened. But there was never ever direct proof of her involvement. Finally, I plucked up the courage. It was a Friday, the end of the day. I said goodbye to the children normally, waited for everyone to leave. Emma was the last to go, as always. She looked at me from the doorway for a long moment, and I could have sworn there was something different in her eyes. Fear, perhaps? Or hope. When the school was empty, I grabbed my coat and keys. I put the address into my phone's GPS. It was almost 6 o'clock, and the sun was already beginning to set, tinging the sky orange and red. I got in the car and drove towards that house, towards that truth I was about to discover. The drive seemed to last an eternity. The streets became more dilapidated as I approached. Abandoned houses, vacant lots, people on street corners who looked at me suspiciously. My heart beat faster and faster. Finally, I arrived at the address. It was a small, single-story house with peeling paint and a yard overgrown with tall weeds. There were no cars in the driveway, but there was a light on inside. Someone was home. I parked in front and turned off the engine. For a moment, I sat there trying to gather courage. I looked at the house and saw a shadow moving behind the front window curtain. Someone was watching me. I took a deep breath, opened the car door, and got out. The air was heavy, humid. I could smell the abandoned factory in the distance, that chemical odor that clung to my throat. I walked slowly to the front door, each step seeming harder than the last. I climbed the 3 steps to the porch. The wood was rotten, creaking under my weight. I raised my hand, hesitated for a fraction of a second, and then knocked on the door. I heard footsteps from the other side of the door. Slow, dragging, hesitant. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The doorknob slowly turned, and the door opened just a few inches, held by a security chain. An eye observed me through the crack, a tired red eye surrounded by deep dark circles. "What do you want?" a female voice asked, hoarse and suspicious. I took a deep breath and introduced myself. I said I was Emma's teacher, that I needed to talk about her. The eye blinked, once, twice. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. "About Emma?" she repeated, her voice changing, becoming tense. The chain was slowly removed and the door opened a little wider. The woman standing before me was about 40 years old, but she looked much older. Her face was marked by deep wrinkles, her hair was disheveled, her clothes seemed not to have been changed in days. There was something disturbing in her eyes, an instability that made me want to take a step back. "It's about Emma," I confirmed, trying to sound professional and calm. "I've noticed some worrying signs, bruises, scratches, withdrawn behavior. I need to understand what's happening at home so I can help her in the best way." The woman's expression changed instantly. Her eyes widened, her hands gripped the edge of the door until her knuckles turned white. "What are you implying?" Her voice came out low, dangerously low. "I'm not implying anything," I replied quickly, but maintaining my composure. "I just need to understand the situation. Emma comes to school with signs of physical violence, and as an educator, I have an obligation to investigate. I need to know if something is happening here that is putting the child at risk." I mentioned the bruises, the scratches, the marks that looked like fingers squeezing fragile arms, the cut on her eyebrow, the way Emma always seemed tired, scared, traumatized. The woman listened to me with an increasingly tense expression, her hands beginning to tremble. "Are you accusing me of hurting my daughter?" she asked, her voice starting to rise. "You came to my house unannounced, without permission, to accuse me of hitting my own child?" "I'm just trying to protect Emma," I replied, feeling the situation slip out of my control. "If there's violence happening here, whether from you or her father, I need to know. It's my legal responsibility to report." "Responsibility?" she screamed, and the door opened completely. "You don't know anything, nothing about me, nothing about my family, nothing about what happened." Her hands clenched into fists, her entire body trembling with rage. I took a step back, but she advanced quickly. "You have no right to come here making accusations. Who do you think you are?" Her voice was hysterical now, completely out of control. Before I could react, she pushed me hard, and I staggered backward. "You want to know about marks? About violence?" she shouted, advancing again. "You don't know what it's like to suffer. You don't know what it's like to lose." She pushed me again, and this time I tripped on the porch steps, almost falling. I tried to get away, to raise my hands in defense, but she was completely out of control. Her nails reached my face, scratching my cheek hard. I felt the blood begin to trickle. "Get out of my house!" she shrieked, pushing me again. "Get out of here before I do something worse! You don't understand anything! Nothing!" She grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me violently, her face inches from mine, her eyes wild and full of tears. I managed to break free with a desperate push and ran to my car, my heart exploding in my chest. I could hear her screaming behind me, an animal sound of pain and rage mixed together. "Don't come back here! Never come back here! You have no right! No right!" I got in the car and locked the doors, my hands trembling so much I could barely put the key in the ignition. I looked through the window and saw the woman standing on the porch, holding her own face, sobbing uncontrollably. There was something deeply disturbing about that scene, something beyond simple anger. I sped off as quickly as possible. In the rearview mirror, I saw the woman fall to her knees at the entrance of the house, her hands covering her face, her body shaking with violent sobs. I drove aimlessly for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. My face burned where she had scratched me. My whole body trembled with adrenaline and fear. I stopped in an empty parking lot and looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. There were 3 deep scratches on my cheek, blood drying in red lines. That reaction had been too extreme, disproportionate. There was something very wrong there, something far beyond a mother protecting herself from accusations. The way she screamed, "You don't know what happened," the wild pain in her eyes, the desperation in her voice. And then I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. At no point did she deny the violence. At no point did she say that Emma was fine, that there were no marks, that I was wrong. She just lost control when confronted with the truth. What had really happened in that house? What was that woman hiding? I picked up my phone but hesitated. Should I call the police? Report the assault? But then what? How would I explain that I went to the family's house without authorization, that I made accusations without concrete proof, that I provoked that reaction? I decided to wait until the next day. I would go to school, talk to Emma directly, ask the right questions. Perhaps now, after confronting her mother, Emma would feel safer to tell the truth, to finally reveal what was happening. I drove home in a state of shock, every muscle in my body tense. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the mother's crazed eyes, heard those desperate screams, felt those nails digging into my face, and in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that there was something much, much more sinister behind it all. Something I still couldn't see but was about to discover. The next morning, I arrived at school earlier than ever. It was 5:30 in the morning, and the sky was still dark. My hands trembled as I opened the classroom door. The scratches on my face burned, covered by a thick layer of makeup that barely disguised the marks. I needed answers. I needed to talk to Emma and understand what was really happening. I sat at my desk and waited, my eyes fixed on the door. The hours passed slowly. 6 in the morning, 6:30, 7. The children began to arrive. One by one, entering the classroom with their colorful backpacks and sleepy smiles. I greeted each one mechanically, but my eyes searched only for Emma. She wasn't there. 7:30, 8 o'clock. Class began. Emma didn't show up. For the first time in months, her desk in the corner was empty. I looked at that empty space and felt a chill run down my spine. Where was she? Why today, after everything that had happened, did she not come? I tried to conduct the class normally, but my mind was completely scattered. That woman's reaction the night before wouldn't leave my head. That desperation, that disproportionate rage, those words, "You don't know what happened." There was something deeply wrong, and I needed to find out what. During the morning break, I made a decision. I went to the principal's office and knocked on the door. Mrs. Patterson was a serious, middle-aged woman who had run the school for over 20 years. She greeted me with concern, immediately noticing the scratches on my face. "Rebecca, what happened?" she asked, motioning for me to sit down. I took a deep breath and told her everything. About Emma, about my concern about the signs of abuse, about going to the family's house, about the mother's violent reaction when confronted. The principal listened in silence, her expression growing increasingly grave. When I finished, she remained silent for a long moment. "Emma Morrison," she repeated slowly, as if the name brought back old, painful memories. "Do you know her?" I asked, my heart racing. The principal slowly got up and went to an old file cabinet in the corner of the room. She rummaged through some folders until she found what she was looking for. She came back to the desk with a somber expression. "Rebecca," she said softly, placing an old folder on the table. "Emma Morrison studied here, but that was a few years ago." She opened the folder, and I saw old documents, yellowed enrollment forms, school reports. "Is she at another school now?" I asked, but my stomach was already clenching. The principal slowly shook her head, her eyes full of sadness. "Emma died in November 2016, 3 years ago. The world stopped. I felt as if someone had pulled the ground from under my feet. What did you say?" I managed to whisper. The principal pulled an old newspaper clipping from the folder. It was yellowed, carefully folded, like something that had been kept never to be forgotten. "This happened 3 years ago," she said, pushing the newspaper toward me. "It was one of the most traumatic things this school has ever faced." With trembling hands, I took the clipping and began to read. The headline read, "6-year-old child dies after domestic beating in Portland." The photo next to it showed a small girl with dark hair and deep eyes. It was her. It was exactly her. Emma Morrison. I read the article with a growing knot in my throat. Emma had been a victim of systematic abuse by her stepfather. Neighbors reported hearing frequent screams coming from the house, but no one reported it. On the night of November 15th, 2016, after a particularly brutal beating, Emma suffered severe head trauma. She died before even reaching the hospital. Did the school suspect anything? My voice came out hoarse, broken. The principal closed her eyes, and I noticed tears forming at the corners. "Yes," she admitted. Her teacher at the time noticed signs: bruises, withdrawn behavior, disturbing drawings. But she hesitated. She was afraid to make an unfounded accusation, to destroy an innocent family. She paused, discreetly wiping a tear. When Emma died, that teacher never forgave herself. She blamed herself for the rest of her life. She left teaching the following year. The last I heard of her, she still carried that weight. I felt like I was suffocating. But I saw Emma, I said, my voice desperate. Every day, for months. She sat at that desk in the corner. She talked to me. She drew. I have her drawings in my drawer. I stopped abruptly. The drawings. I jumped up and ran back to my classroom, the principal following me, concerned. I frantically opened my drawer, searching for the sheets of paper I had kept so carefully. I rummaged through everything, threw materials out, searched every corner. There was nothing. No drawings, no physical evidence of Emma's existence. The principal watched me from the doorway, her expression a mix of concern and something more. Something that looked like understanding. "Rebecca," she said gently, "you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should take a few days off. The scratches on your face, all this confusion." But I knew I wasn't confused. I wasn't imagining things. Emma had been there. She had shown me her pain, her suffering, her story. I looked at the empty desk in the corner of the room, the desk Emma occupied every day. I walked to it slowly and ran my hand over the surface. It was covered in dust, a thick layer that indicated no one had sat there in a long time. But then I noticed something. On the worn wood, almost imperceptible, there were small scratches, marks of children's nails, desperate scratches on the surface, and subtly engraved in the wood, as if it had been repeatedly scratched with a pencil. A name: Emma. I touched the letters with trembling fingers. She had been here. Not physically, not really, but somehow she had left her mark. She had returned to the only place where she felt safe, where there was some chance for someone to finally see her, finally hear her. "She came to me," I whispered, more to myself than to the principal. She needed someone to know, for someone to see what happened to her. The principal approached and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "The guilt never leaves this school," she said softly. "What happened to Emma is a wound that never completely healed. All the teachers here know her story. We all carry the weight of what could have been prevented." I looked at her with tears streaming freely down my face. "But why me? Why did she come to me?" The principal sighed deeply. "Perhaps because you cared. Perhaps because, unlike that first teacher, you were willing to act, even if it was too late." Too late. The words echoed in my mind like a death knell. I had spent months talking to the ghost of a dead child, a child who was desperately trying to show me what had happened to her. And now that I finally knew the truth, there was nothing I could do. The stepfather was in prison. The mother had gone mad with guilt. And Emma, well, no one was sure where Emma was now. If she had finally found peace, or if she was still trapped in that classroom, waiting for the next person who could see her. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice broken. The principal sadly shook her head. "You carry her story. You make sure you never hesitate again when you see the signs. That's all any of us can do." That night, I sat at home with the newspaper clipping the principal had let me take. I read and reread Emma's story until I memorized every word. I looked at her photo until her features were permanently etched into my memory. She was 6 years old. Only 6 years old. A lifetime stolen from her by monsters who were supposed to protect her. And all the adults around her, including me, had failed her in different ways. I swore that night that I would never hesitate again. I would never again let the fear of consequences stop me from protecting a child, even if it cost me my job, my reputation, my freedom. Because now I knew what happens when silence wins. I had seen the result with my own eyes. Emma Morrison. I would never forget her name. I would never forget her empty eyes pleading for help. I would never forget that, for a few impossible months, a dead child trusted me to tell her story. And now I would carry that story forever. The following days were the hardest of my life. Every time I entered that classroom, my eyes were immediately drawn to that empty desk in the corner. The desk Emma had occupied for months. The desk where a dead child had sat, desperately trying to tell me her story. I stopped sleeping properly. When I finally managed to close my eyes, I dreamed of her. I saw Emma standing at the end of dark corridors, her mouth open in a silent scream, her arms outstretched towards me. I woke up drenched in sweat, with the bitter taste of guilt in my mouth. The children in my class noticed the change. I was more distant, more distracted. I couldn't connect with them in the same way. Every time I saw a bruise, a scratch, any sign of possible violence, my heart raced. I asked questions, documented everything, reported immediately. Some parents complained that I was being intrusive, paranoid. But I didn't care. I would never hesitate again. I would never let fear paralyze me again. 3 weeks after the discovery, I returned to that house. I don't know what I expected to find. Perhaps some kind of closure, some answer that could ease the burden I carried. The house was even more dilapidated. The garden had grown wild, swallowing the low fence. The windows were dark, dead. I knocked on the door, but no one answered. I tried again. Nothing. A passing neighbor told me that the woman had been admitted to a psychiatric institution a few weeks ago. She had tried to harm herself, constantly screamed her daughter's name, swore that Emma was still alive, that someone had stolen her. "It was a tragedy what happened here," the neighbor said, shaking his head. "That monster of a husband killed the little girl. Everyone heard the screams over the months, but no one wanted to get involved. By the time we found out what had happened, it was too late." He looked at me sadly. "We carry that guilt every day, you know? Knowing we could have done something." I perfectly understood what he felt. I went back to my car and just sat there, looking at that house. That was where Emma had lived her last days. That was where she had suffered, had cried, had silently begged for help in all the ways a 6-year-old can. And no one saved her. I started therapy. My therapist said I was dealing with survivor's guilt, that I was projecting my own sense of failure onto Emma's story. He tried to make me understand that I couldn't have done anything, that Emma was already dead when she appeared to me, that there was no way to save someone who was already lost. But he didn't understand. because Emma didn't come to me by chance. She came because somehow she knew I would care enough to investigate, to act, to tell her story. And in a way, I had failed her too, by hesitating, by waiting for more proof. A month after the revelation, I stayed late at school. It was Friday. Everyone had already left. I was organizing materials, avoiding going home where nightmares awaited me. The room was silent, only the distant sound of the wind hitting the windows. I sat at my desk and looked at that desk in the corner. And then, for the first time in weeks, I felt that familiar presence. That weight in the air, that feeling that I wasn't alone. I looked at the desk, and for a brief moment, I swore I saw a shadow sitting there. The small, fragile shadow of a 6-year-old girl. My heart raced, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from something more complex. Sadness, connection, understanding. "Emma," I whispered in the empty room, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't get here in time. I'm so sorry for everyone who failed you." The words came out in a broken whisper. "But I promise your story won't be forgotten. I promise I'll never let this happen to another child." The shadow remained for a few more seconds, and then, softly, disappeared. And with it, that oppressive weight I had carried for weeks seemed to lighten slightly. It didn't disappear completely. It never would. But it became more bearable. I cried in that empty room for a long time. I cried for Emma. I cried for all the children who suffer in silence. I cried for my own naivete, for believing that the world was a safer place than it really is. When I finally got up to leave, I looked one last time at that desk. It was empty, covered in dust. But on the wood, those letters were still there. Emma. A permanent mark, a physical reminder that she had existed, had suffered, and had been important. I turned off the lights and closed the door. In the silent hallway, I paused for a moment. And then, so softly that I could barely be sure it wasn't my imagination, I heard children's laughter and footsteps running nearby the room. I looked back, but the hallway was empty and dark. Still, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. A small sense of peace. Perhaps Emma could finally rest. Perhaps telling her story was all she needed. Or perhaps she was still there, in that classroom, waiting for the next person who could see her. Waiting for another chance to be heard, to be saved, even if it was too late. I never went back to that classroom after that day. I requested a transfer to another school, a new beginning. But Emma's story came with me. It is etched in my soul like those letters were etched in the desk. A permanent mark that will never disappear. Today, years later, I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking about her. I still wonder what would have happened if the first teacher had been brave. If the neighbors had reported it. If someone, anyone, had acted in time. But there's no use living on what ifs. Emma has been dead for years. All I can do now is carry her memory and make sure that no other child under my care suffers the same fate. It's a heavy burden, a responsibility that haunts me, but it's the least I owe her. To the girl who came back from beyond to tell her story, to the child who trusted me when there was no one else, to Emma Morrison, who deserved to live but was stolen from the world by monsters who were supposed to protect her. I will never forget her eyes. Those empty, tired eyes of a child who had seen too many horrors. I will never forget her low voice asking for help. I will never forget that, for a few impossible months, I was the only person in the world who could see her. And that truth will haunt me for the rest of my life.
And so ends the story of Rebecca Hartwell and her impossible student. Rebecca never returned to that classroom. Today she works at another school in another city, but she carries with her the memory of Emma Morrison, a child who shouldn't have been there, but was. A presence that defied all laws of nature just to have her story told. The house where Emma died remains abandoned to this day. Neighbors report strange sounds coming from there at night. Some swear they've seen a small shadow in the dark windows, watching the street. Others say it's just imagination, the weight of collective guilt projected onto an empty structure. But Rebecca knows the truth. She lived the truth. Emma's stepfather is serving a life sentence. Her mother remains institutionalized, still unable to accept that her daughter is gone. And Emma, well, no one knows for sure where Emma is now. If she finally found peace, Or if she's still trapped in that classroom, waiting for the next person who can see her. Sometimes I wonder how many Emmas there are out there. How many children are suffering in silence right now, waiting for someone to notice the signs, waiting for someone to be brave enough to act. How many stories like this will never be told because no one was paying attention? And here's the scariest part of this story, it's real. Perhaps not exactly as it was told, perhaps without the supernatural elements. But in essence, stories like Emma's happen every day. Children being abused, neglected, destroyed by those who are supposed to protect them. And often, there are signs. There are always signs. The question is, are we paying attention? Think about it the next time you see a child who is too quiet, too withdrawn. The next time you notice unexplained marks. The next time your instinct tells you something is wrong. Will you act? Or will you hesitate, as so many hesitated with Emma? Because the most terrifying truth isn't ghosts or apparitions. It's knowing that you can be the difference between life and death for a child, and choosing silence. Rebecca Hartwell learned that lesson the most brutal way possible. A lesson that haunts her to this day. A lesson that changed her life forever. What if it were you? What if it were a child in your classroom, in your neighborhood, in your own family? Would you have the courage to act? Or would you join the long list of people who saw, suspected, but did nothing? That's the question I leave you with today. If this story made you feel something, if it touched you in some way, hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and in the comments tell me, have you ever witnessed something similar? Have you ever felt that shiver down your spine when you realized something was wrong? I look forward to reading your experiences. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, now is the time. Every week I bring stories that will make you question reality, that will keep you awake at night, that will make you look at the world in a different way. Activate the bell to not miss any episode. Remember, the scariest stories aren't about imaginary monsters. They're about the real monsters who live among us, disguised as normal people, hidden behind closed doors, causing horrors no ghost could ever cause. Emma Morrison existed. Children like her exist now. And the question remains, what will you do about it? Sleep well, if you can. Until the next story.